this hypothesis holds true. And that's an extraordinary thing. What Naledi has taught us is that there is clearly more out there that we didn't know.
Of all the ways to discover a new species of human, I honestly didn't expect it to involve squeezing through a gap 7.5 inches wide, literally the length of a pencil, while dangling over a 100-foot drop.
But as you get into caving more and more, the scientific side of it comes into it. You want to know, how did these places form? What happened here millions of years ago?
But that's exactly what had to happen to reach one of the most bizarre human relatives we've ever found. A species that, frankly, shouldn't exist according to everything we thought we knew about human evolution. So yeah, this is the story of Homo naledi.
Yeah, at first we didn't exactly know what fossils yet. We started looking around a bit more until we found a mandible, and that was when we knew this was probably hominid.
A species that's been completely messing with our heads since 2013. And I mean that literally. These guys had brains about the size of chimpanzees, but they might have been burying their dead and making art in caves. Which, is not exactly what you'd expect from a species whose entire skull could fit in your cupped hands. Picture this. September 13th, 2013. Two recreational cavers named Rick Hunter and Stephen Tucker are exploring the Rising Star Cave system near Johannesburg, South Africa. They're just doing what cavers do, crawling through tight spaces looking for new passages. But then Hunter spots something that stops him dead in his tracks. There's this narrow chimney, maybe 12 meters long but only about 8 inches of wiggle room. Most people would take one look at that and go, absolutely not. But Hunter, being the kind of person who apparently enjoys testing the limits of human flexibility, decides to squeeze through. And at the bottom of this claustrophobic nightmare, he finds himself in a chamber 30 meters underground where the floor is literally covered with fossil bones, just scattered everywhere like some ancient battlefield.
And since this discovery, it's crazy what's happening here.
Now, here's where it gets interesting from a scientific perspective. When Hunter and Tucker took photos and showed them to paleoanthropologist Lee Berger at the University of Witwatersrand, Berger immediately realized they had a problem. These bones looked incredibly important, but the passage was so narrow that most adults simply couldn't fit through it. So Berger did something pretty unprecedented in paleontology. He put out a call on social media for skinny scientists. The initial excavation team ended up being made up entirely of 6 women, all chosen specifically because they could fit through what the team started calling Superman's crawl. And what they found down there was absolutely unprecedented. Over 2 excavations, they pulled out more than 1,550 fossil specimens representing at least 15 different individuals. Men, women, children, elderly adults, basically an entire community frozen in time. It was the largest collection of a single hominin species ever found in Africa. When the team started analyzing these bones, they quickly realized they were dealing with something that didn't fit any existing category. The species they named Homo Naledi, Naledi meaning star in the local Sotho language, was a complete evolutionary puzzle. Here's what makes Naledi so bizarre. Their brains averaged between 465 and 610 cubic centimeters. Modern human brains are between 1,270 and 1,330 cubic centimeters. So we're talking about 1/3 the size of ours, closer to what you'd see in early hominins or chimpanzees. But despite having these tiny brains, everything else about them was strangely mixed up. Their hands were remarkably modern, dexterous fingers perfect for tool making, human-like wrists, thumbs that could grip objects with precision. Their feet were practically indistinguishable from ours, built for long-distance walking on 2 legs. Yet their shoulders were configured like those of much earlier hominins. Their fingers were dramatically curved like they were still climbing trees regularly, and their rib cages flared out wide like Lucy's did millions of years earlier. It was like someone took parts from different stages of human evolution and randomly assembled them into one species. They stood about 4 feet 9 inches tall and weighed around 88 pounds, basically the size of a small modern human, but with that chimpanzee-sized brain rattling around in their skulls. Initially, scientists assumed these fossils had to be really old, like 1 to 2 million years old. I mean, that would make sense, right? Small brains, primitive features, obviously they must be from the early days of human evolution. But when the dating results came back in 2017, jaws dropped across the paleontology community. These fossils were between 335,000 and 236,000 years old. Homo Naledi was walking around southern Africa at the same time that early Homo sapiens were evolving. This was supposed to be impossible. By this point in human evolution, all the small-brained hominins should have been long extinct, outcompeted by bigger-brained species like us. The whole narrative of human evolution has always been about this inexorable march toward larger brains and greater intelligence. But here was Naledi, somehow surviving with primitive neural equipment well into the Middle Pleistocene. It's like finding a Model T Ford driving around on modern highways next to Teslas and BMWs. It shouldn't work, but apparently it did. But the really mind-bending mystery isn't just what Naledi was. It's how all these bones ended up in that cave chamber. Because the Naledi chamber where they were found is not the kind of place you accidentally wander into. We're talking about a location that's 80 meters from the nearest entrance, through passages so convoluted that you need specialized equipment and training just to reach it. The chamber has always been in complete darkness. No natural light has ever reached it. There's no evidence that large predators could have dragged bodies down there. There's no sign that water ever flowed through the system in a way that could have washed bones in. And here's the really strange part. Naledi bones are basically the only thing in these chambers. No other animal remains to speak of. No tools, no signs of habitation. Just Naledi bones from multiple individuals scattered across the floor. The original research team concluded that the only explanation that made sense was that other Naledi individuals had deliberately carried these bodies into the cave and deposited them there. In other words, they were practicing some form of deliberate body disposal. But remember, these are creatures with chimpanzee-sized brains we're talking about. The idea that they could plan and execute complex behaviors like deliberately carrying bodies through treacherous cave passages in complete darkness seemed, well, impossible. Then, in 2023, Lee Berger and his team dropped another bombshell. They claimed that Naledi wasn't just disposing of bodies in caves. They were actively digging burial pits, deliberately arranging bodies in crouched positions, covering them with sediment, and even carving symbols on cave walls. Basically, they were claiming that Naledi had developed complex mortuary practices 200,000 years before any other species. The scientific community went absolutely nuclear over this. These claims suggested that small-brained hominins were capable of abstract thought, symbolic behavior, and complex social practices that we thought were unique to large-brained species. Berger's team argued they had found clear burial features, excavated pits with Naledi remains positioned inside them, stone tools placed with the bodies, and evidence of fire use throughout the cave system. They claimed Naledi was lighting torches to navigate the dark passages and had even carved crosshatched symbols on the cave walls. But here's where the scientific method really kicks in. A group of experts from around the world examined these claims and published a scathing critique in late 2023. They argued that there simply wasn't enough evidence to support such extraordinary conclusions. The supposed burial pits could be natural depressions. The stone tools might just be broken rocks, what geologists call geofacts. The evidence for fire could be mineral staining rather than actual charcoal. And the wall markings could be the result of natural weathering or even animal claws rather than intentional carving. As one critic put it, we really need substantial additional documentation and scientific analyses before we can rule out that natural agents were responsible. But here's what makes this whole controversy even more fascinating. While scientists are debating whether Naledi could have had complex behaviors, other researchers have been studying their actual brains. And what they found is genuinely surprising. By examining the internal surface of Naledi skulls, which preserves impressions of the brain surface, scientists discovered that despite their small size, Naledi brains had surprisingly human-like structural features. The frontal lobe, which in modern humans is associated with planning, decision-making, and social behavior, showed distinctly human characteristics rather than ape-like ones. In chimpanzees and early hominins like Australopithecus, there's a groove called the fronto-orbital sulcus that's clearly visible on brain impressions. But in humans and other members of the genus Homo, this groove is absent because certain brain regions have expanded. Naledi shows the human pattern despite having such a small brain. The researcher who first examined these brain impressions, Ralph Holloway, who's been studying hominin brains for decades, reportedly said he couldn't believe structures this human-like could exist in such a small brain. But when he made physical models of the Naledi brain, they confirmed what the digital reconstruction showed. So Naledi had human-like brain organization packed into a chimpanzee-sized package, which raises all sorts of uncomfortable questions about the relationship between brain size and intelligence. Maybe the most unsettling thing about Naledi is how long they managed to survive. While other human species were evolving bigger brains and more sophisticated tools, Naledi seems to have just persisted. Like that one species that refuses to read the evolutionary memo about what it's supposed to be doing. They survived for potentially hundreds of thousands of years in southern Africa while sharing the landscape with much larger-brained hominins. They developed hands perfectly suited for making tools, yet we haven't found any stone tools directly associated with them. They had human-like feet built for long-distance walking, but they kept those curved, climbing-adapted fingers. It's like they were evolutionary holdouts, refusing to participate in the arms race toward bigger brains that characterized most of human evolution. And somehow, it worked for them for a very long time. The discovery of Naledi has opened up questions that we're still nowhere close to answering. If small brains were capable of complex behaviors like deliberate burial, then what does that say about our understanding of intelligence and consciousness? Were there other small brain species engaging in behaviors we'd consider distinctly human? And if Naledi could make tools, which their hands suggest they absolutely could, then how much of the Middle Stone Age archaeological record in southern Africa might actually belong to them rather than to modern humans? Archaeologists have always assumed that sophisticated stone tools must have been made by big-brain species, but Naledi's existence forces us to reconsider that assumption. There's also the ongoing mystery of how Naledi managed to coexist with larger-brained humans for so long. Were they occupying different ecological niches? Did they have some survival advantage that we don't understand? Or were they slowly being driven into marginal habitats like deep caves? Here's what Naledi teaches us, regardless of whether they were actually burying their dead or carving symbols. Human evolution wasn't the neat linear progression we once imagined. It wasn't a story of gradual improvement from primitive to advanced, from small brains to large brains, from simple behaviors to complex ones. Instead, it was messy and chaotic, with multiple human species experimenting with different combinations of traits. Some species bet everything on bigger brains. Others, like Naledi, found ways to thrive with the neural equipment of much earlier hominins. And the really uncomfortable truth is that we still don't fully understand what made the difference. Why did some lineages develop massive brains while others persisted with small ones? What were the actual advantages that larger brains provided, and under what circumstances might smaller brains have been sufficient? Naledi forces us to confront the possibility that our own species' trajectory, the path toward ever larger brains and more complex technology, wasn't inevitable. It was just one possible evolutionary solution among many. Even now, more than a decade after their discovery, Naledi continues to generate controversy and surprise. New excavations are ongoing, new bones are being found, and researchers are still debating fundamental questions about their behavior and capabilities. Lieberger continues to push the envelope with increasingly bold claims about Naledi's cognitive abilities. His critics continue to demand more rigorous evidence, and the bones themselves continue to yield new information that doesn't fit neatly into any existing category. In some ways, Naledi has become paleontology's most stubborn puzzle. Every time scientists think they've figured out what this species represents, new evidence emerges that complicates the picture. They're the human relative that refuses to be easily categorized, the evolutionary mystery that won't stay solved. And maybe that's exactly what makes them so important. In a field where researchers often feel pressure to provide neat, definitive answers, Naledi serves as a reminder that evolution is fundamentally messy and unpredictable. Sometimes the most important discoveries are the ones that force us to admit how much we still don't know. So the next time someone tells you that human evolution follows a simple pattern of gradual improvement, remember Homo Naledi, the small-brained survivors who somehow managed to thrive in the shadow of their bigger-brained cousins. They're a reminder that evolution doesn't follow rules, it just keeps experimenting, sometimes producing results that seem impossible until we're literally holding the bones in our hands, wondering how the hell they managed to pull it off. Thanks for watching, and until next time on Before Fire.